The delivery was supposed to be routine. One box truck, one technician, one crate containing a medical-grade ventilator that had taken 6 months of insurance appeals, doctor referrals, and sleepless nights to finally arrive. It wasn't just a package. It was a lifeline for their 6-year-old son, who couldn't sleep through the night without struggling for breath. The hospital had cleared everything. The manufacturer had confirmed delivery. It was scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m., and they had made sure someone would be home to receive it with all the paperwork ready and space cleared near his bed. But just minutes after the truck pulled up, she appeared, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, standing in the middle of the sidewalk like a gatekeeper to a kingdom she didn't own. She didn't ask what was in the truck. She didn't look at the medical logo printed clearly on the side. All she saw was a violation. "No curb parking on Thursdays," she said flatly, pointing to a laminated calendar of HOA street cleaning rules. The technician tried to explain, but she interrupted, quoting bylaws, threatening fines, even hinting at towing the vehicle. While she argued policy, a child inside the house lay waiting, lungs tight, body tired, unaware that the one piece of equipment meant to make his life safer was being held hostage by a rule that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. What she didn't realize was that this family wasn't going to back down. And what started with a clipboard and a cruel decision would soon unravel in front of an entire city. The ventilator wasn't a luxury. It wasn't something they had ordered on a whim or because a doctor made a passing suggestion. It was the result of months of consultations, second opinions, sleep studies, and overnight hospital stays. Their son had been diagnosed with a rare neuromuscular condition that made it difficult for him to breathe while sleeping. His chest muscles were simply too weak to support his lungs through the night. Every breath he took after midnight became an act of effort. They had tried everything: elevated pillows, positional supports, even round-the-clock monitoring, but nothing provided real safety. A single respiratory infection could spiral into hospitalization. The doctors had told them plainly he needed nighttime ventilation, not in a week, not in a month. Now, the paperwork, however, had other plans. Insurance didn't move quickly for things like this. There were approvals to obtain, authorizations to verify, suppliers to confirm. Even with the medical team pushing, the process dragged on. Every night felt like a gamble. His mother would sit beside his bed with a pulse oximeter and a notebook, logging his oxygen levels, watching for the slightest dip. His father learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. They both carried an invisible weight that grew heavier with every unanswered email and delayed callback. But finally, after 6 long months, it was approved. A portable home ventilator, pre-calibrated for pediatric use, with backup batteries and a trained technician to install it. The delivery was scheduled for Thursday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The night before, they didn't sleep much, not out of fear this time, but relief. The father cleared space in their son's room, moved furniture, rolled up cords, vacuumed under the bed. The mother set out all the paperwork, delivery confirmation, manufacturer's instructions, hospital letters. They even arranged for a respiratory therapist from the hospital to come by that afternoon to double-check the setup. Everything had been thought through. There was no room for error. This wasn't just about receiving a machine. It was about reclaiming a piece of their son's future. That morning, the sun rose early. The father brewed coffee but barely drank it. Their son, still too young to understand the full scope of what was coming, only knew something big was happening. He sat on the couch in pajamas, cradling a stuffed dinosaur, asking when the magic machine would get there. At 8:47 a.m., the box truck turned onto their street. It was a small vehicle, nothing disruptive, with the medical supplier's name stenciled on the side. The technician inside was professional, calm, and efficient. He checked the address twice, parked along the curb just outside the driveway, turned on the hazard lights, and climbed out to open the lift gate. It was a moment of quiet triumph. Months of frustration had narrowed to this one action, lowering the platform to the pavement, ready to roll out the equipment that would finally let their son sleep safely. The father opened the front door. The boy sat up straighter. Everything had aligned until it didn't. The technician had just begun to unlatch the crate when the voice came, sharp and commanding, slicing through the quiet morning like a siren no one had asked for. She stood at the edge of her property, arms crossed, clipboard already in hand, as if she'd been waiting for this very moment. Her lawn was flawless, edges clean, mulch fresh, every hedge trimmed to a height that suggested obsession. Karen. He didn't know her real name. Nobody seemed to. But everyone called her that. Not behind her back, either. Her reputation preceded her, enforced with the same energy she now directed at the delivery driver. She pointed at the truck like it was a crime scene. "No parking on the curb Thursdays," she said, her voice clipped, flat, emotionless. The technician, caught mid-motion, glanced from her to the father now stepping outside. He tried to explain. "Medical delivery. Urgent equipment. Won't take long." But Karen wasn't listening. She tapped her laminated HOA schedule with the kind of certainty that comes from years of controlling meetings and lawn paint codes. "Street cleaning day," she repeated. "Violation of Section 4A. The words were delivered with the cold precision of someone who believed the rulebook mattered more than the people it governed. The father stepped forward, calm but tense. He gestured to the truck, explained what was inside, explained that his son, just 6 years old, was waiting inside the house for a machine that would help him breathe, that this wasn't furniture or an Amazon delivery, but life support equipment prescribed by a specialist. Karen didn't blink. She didn't ask for details. She didn't soften. She just pointed at the curb and repeated herself. Not aloud. The technician, nervous now, looked for a compromise. He offered to move the truck to the corner, unload there, and walk the equipment back with the dolly. But Karen objected again. "You can't use the sidewalk for transport. It's private property. You'll damage the landscaping." She pointed at the strip of grass between the curb and the sidewalk as if it were a sacred zone. "And your wheels aren't HOA compliant for turf protection," she added. The words sounded absurd, but she delivered them like legal testimony. Behind them, inside the house, the boy coughed, a deep, wet sound that made the father flinch. It was the kind of cough he'd grown to fear, the one that meant inflammation, the one that meant strain, the one that told them the window for safety was closing. He turned back to Karen, this time more urgently, pleaded again, told her he would take responsibility, that no one else had to get involved, that this would take no more than 15 minutes. Still, she refused. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She had the clipboard, the schedule, the confidence of someone who knew how to weaponize rules. And then, just as the technician was about to reload the crate back onto the lift, she pulled out her phone. "If you don't move the truck," she said plainly, "I'm calling parking enforcement. They'll ticket you, maybe tow you. Your choice." For a moment, everything was still. The birds, the breeze, the sound of wheels against concrete. The father stood there, heart pounding, helpless. He thought about dragging the crate inside himself, about lifting 140 pounds of equipment without the dolly, without help, through the front door and down the hallway to his son's room. But it wasn't safe. The technician wasn't allowed to leave the equipment unless it was signed and installed. And if the truck left without completing the delivery, they'd be put back at the bottom of the distribution list. Another 2 weeks, maybe more. He looked down the street, quiet, empty, not a city sweeper in sight, not even a trash bin on the curb. Just a wide-open road and a woman determined to prove that power mattered more than people. And inside the house, a little boy waited, lungs tight, unaware that the help he needed had arrived and was now being blocked by a rule that no one would even remember a day later, except the people who lived through it. The crate sat on the lift gate, halfway lowered to the ground, while time dissolved into a haze of anxiety and rising urgency. The technician had one hand on the control lever, the other gripping the dolly, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't trained for conflict. His job was to deliver equipment, not navigate a homeowners association battlefield. The father took a deep breath and stepped back inside the house, grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter, and began making calls. The first was to the HOA office. He knew the number by heart, had seen it printed in every monthly bulletin, stamped on every warning notice they slid under doors. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. He didn't bother leaving a message. He knew from experience that no one would return the call until long after the situation had escalated or ended. The second call was to the city's parking enforcement department. A polite voice answered, asked for details, and then said they had no jurisdiction on private HOA property. The third call was to the street cleaning service itself, just in case someone could confirm whether trucks were actually scheduled to run that day. The woman on the other end checked the schedule and paused before saying, "We're not servicing that block today. It was rescheduled due to equipment rotation." That one sentence hit him like a punch to the chest. There wasn't even a cleaning truck coming. All of this, all the obstruction, the threats, the refusal, was happening because of a rule that didn't even apply that day. He stepped back onto the porch, trying to keep calm, and relayed the news to Karen, who was still planted firmly on her side of the street, watching everything with unnerving calm. She didn't blink. She simply said, "The HOA schedule doesn't change unless it's in writing, and I haven't received any notice." His fingers clenched the phone so tightly he felt the plastic shift under his grip. He thought about calling the police, but quickly dismissed it. This wasn't a crime, not in the technical sense. And even if they did come, what would they do? Ask politely, shrug, and leave? Time wasn't on his side. Inside, his son had begun coughing again. that ragged, hollow sound that sent a jolt of fear through every bone in his body. He handed his phone to the technician and ran back inside. He found his son curled on the couch, sweating despite the cool air. He placed his palm on the boy's chest, felt the shallow rise and fall, the labor in every breath. There was no doubt. The stress, the delay, it was all catching up. They needed the ventilator that was still sitting outside, still blocked by a rule that no one seemed brave enough to override. The next call he made wasn't to a city department. It was to a reporter, a local journalist who had once written a piece on disability access in housing. He had her number saved from an old email thread where they had exchanged information months ago. She answered on the second ring. He spoke quickly, laying out what had happened. The delivery, the equipment, the rule, the refusal. She was silent for a moment, then asked for the address. "We're 10 minutes out," she said. "We're bringing a camera." He didn't know whether to feel hope or panic. Part of him hated that it had come to this, that his son's safety now depended not on compassion, but on cameras. But another part of him felt vindicated. If no one else would listen, maybe public exposure would. He went back outside, told the technician to hold tight, and waited. Karen, still standing like a statue, didn't seem fazed. At 9:52 a.m., the news van turned the corner. A reporter stepped out with a cameraman behind her. They didn't rush. They walked slowly, deliberately, like they already knew this scene would matter. The technician stepped aside. The father explained the story once again, this time with a microphone near his face and a lens tracking every word. He spoke not with outrage, but exhaustion, the voice of someone who had followed every rule, submitted every form, jumped through every hoop, only to be stopped by a neighbor who valued policy over humanity. The cameraman captured the truck, the crate, the front door, and Karen still unmoved on her pristine lawn. She was asked if she'd like to make a statement. She declined. By the time the piece aired that evening, the boy had finally received the equipment. Not because Karen relented, she never did, but because the camera forced the story into motion. An HOA board member, alerted by the press, called in a temporary exemption. The technician rolled the crate inside as the boy lay in bed, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. And the father, standing in the hallway with the reporter's business card still in his pocket, knew this wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning. The segment aired during the 6 o'clock news, just under 2 minutes long, but powerful enough to stop viewers mid-bite during dinner. The anchor's tone was neutral, but beneath it a sense of restrained disbelief simmered. A disabled child, a time-sensitive medical delivery, and a neighbor who chose to enforce a parking rule over common sense. The footage showed enough to paint a clear picture. The truck waiting, the crate on the liftgate, the father speaking calmly but visibly strained, and Karen, her face partially turned from the camera, arms folded, lips tight, standing in the middle of the confrontation, refusing to move. No commentary was needed. The images said it all. Within the hour, the station's clip had been posted to social media. By morning, it had been shared more than 15,000 times. The headline was simple but damning. HOA blocks medical equipment delivery for sick child over parking schedule. The comments exploded. Parents, nurses, veterans, people who had fought their own wars with HOAs and gatekeepers. Many had never commented on a news article before, but this story hit a nerve. The outrage wasn't just about one child. It was about the realization that any family could be next, that someone else's need for control could so easily override decency, empathy, and law. Local officials responded within hours. A city council member issued a statement condemning the obstruction of medical services, while the mayor's office called the family directly to offer support. Advocacy groups began resharing the video, adding captions like, "This is why the ADA exists," and "This is what weaponized power looks like in the suburbs." Even a national disability rights nonprofit issued a response, urging citizens to push for clearer legal protections around time-sensitive medical deliveries in residential areas. The HOA board was caught flat-footed. Their inboxes overflowed, their phone line jammed, their website temporarily crashed under the volume of traffic. The official statement came 2 days later, carefully worded and heavy with corporate distancing. They described the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding and promised a full review of policies. But by then, no one was listening to apologies. The public had already formed its opinion, and the court of public opinion was swift and unforgiving. Karen's name, though not used in the news clip, was quickly discovered. A neighbor posted a screen capture from a neighborhood group where she had once boasted about cleaning up the curb from delivery trucks. From there, screenshots of her previous HOA posts began circulating, complaints about recycling bins, stroller wheels, and sidewalk chalk. Her identity became a symbol, not just of one bad decision, but of an entire culture of performative authority. Her social media accounts went private. The lawn signs disappeared. Her porch light stayed off. Meanwhile, something different was happening around the family's home. Neighbors began to stop by, not to pry or offer pity, but to apologize, to bring flowers, to leave cards. One woman, whose husband had once been fined for having his wheelchair ramp a few inches too long, left a note that simply said, "You're not alone anymore." Others began to speak up at HOA meetings, demanding not just rule reform, but accountability. For the family, it was surreal. Their living room had become a command center. Calls from journalists, emails from strangers, letters from families they'd never met, sharing their own battles with bureaucracy. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. What had begun as a desperate plea on a front lawn was now a conversation happening across the country about policy, about compassion, about what kind of neighborhoods we want to live in. The father, once afraid that no one would believe him, now found himself fielding interview requests from national outlets. But he turned most of them down. He wasn't looking for exposure. He just wanted his son to breathe without interruption, to live in a home where help could arrive without needing to be defended. And while the boy didn't understand everything that had happened, he could feel the difference. The house felt lighter. His parents smiled more. The machine beside his bed hummed softly each night, doing its job. And when he looked out the window in the morning, the street didn't seem so hard anymore. Not because the rules had vanished, but because enough people had finally seen what those rules had done, and they had decided to speak. 3 days after the story aired, An envelope arrived at the family's door bearing the seal of the state's Department of Health and Human Services. The letter inside was short, direct, and definitive. Under both state and federal law, no local ordinance, community association policy, or neighborhood rule could lawfully obstruct the delivery of medical equipment deemed essential by a licensed physician. The letter didn't mention Karen by name. It didn't have to. It stated, without ambiguity, that the incident had been reviewed and that the actions taken to delay the delivery were in direct violation of federal access protections outlined under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It concluded with a note encouraging the family to file a formal complaint should any future attempts at interference occur. A contact name and phone number were listed in bold at the bottom. This was not a suggestion. It was a warning to anyone who might try to use bureaucracy as a weapon again. Within hours of receiving the letter, the family's attorney, who had been assisting pro bono since the story broke, filed a notice of formal complaint against the HOA, citing not only obstruction of medical care, but a pattern of discriminatory enforcement based on multiple testimonies that had surfaced since the broadcast. Former and current residents had begun submitting statements, stories of ramps being flagged, service vehicles being ticketed, emergency repairs blocked by arbitrary time windows. What had started with one incident had cracked open a larger truth. The HOA wasn't just inefficient, it was predatory. The board, now under intense scrutiny, scheduled a closed-door emergency session. Members who had remained silent through Karen's tenure were suddenly distancing themselves. The president, once content to rubber-stamp complaints, issued a public memo condemning the interference and offering a formal apology to the family. He called the incident deeply troubling and promised immediate reforms. The memo also confirmed that Karen had been suspended from the board pending a vote on permanent removal. That vote came the following week, unanimous, swift, and final. At the same time, the City Council held a special meeting to address what they referred to as neighborhood-level misuse of power in life-critical situations. The father was invited to speak. He didn't dress for television. He wore jeans, a plain shirt, and stood with the quiet gravity of a man who had fought through fatigue, anger, and fear to get to this moment. He read a prepared statement, short, steady, and focused not on punishment, but prevention. No parent, he said, should ever have to negotiate their child's safety with a clipboard. The room was silent when he finished. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. In the following days, new ordinances were drafted requiring all HOAs in the district to register emergency access protocols with the city. A hotline was established to report obstruction of medical deliveries. And most importantly, an amendment was added to the municipal code granting immediate exemption to any vehicle delivering doctor-prescribed medical equipment, regardless of existing parking or access rules. Karen never appeared in public again. Her home, once pristine and regulated to the inch, began to show signs of neglect. The hedges overgrew. The porch light remained off. A for sale sign went up before the month was over. The house stayed listed for longer than expected. The internet never forgets. And the story had lived long enough to attach itself to the address. Meanwhile, the family settled back into their routine. The ventilator was now a fixture in their son's room, its quiet hum a nightly comfort. He slept longer, breathed deeper, woke without coughing. His mother no longer hovered outside his room at 3 a.m. His father stopped checking for a delivery van that might never come. They didn't ask for attention. They didn't want revenge. What they wanted, what they had fought for, was the right to live without being bullied into fear by someone who mistook enforcement for leadership. That right had been challenged, but it had also been affirmed loudly and unmistakably by a city that decided to listen. And in the corner of their living room, in a thin folder labeled Case File HOA, was a copy of the letter from the Department of Health. It wasn't framed, it wasn't displayed, but it was there, just in case anyone ever tried again. The house was quiet again, but in a different way than before. It wasn't the stillness of tension or the silence of people waiting for the next disruption. It was peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting, but from surviving. The ventilator hummed softly in the boy's room, its gentle rhythm becoming as natural as the sound of wind through the trees or the ticking of the hallway clock. For the first time in months, his parents slept without waking every 30 minutes to check his breathing. The monitor still sat by the bedside, but it rarely sounded now. He slept longer, deeper. He smiled more in the mornings. The ramp outside the front door had been reinforced, its edges painted with reflective strips. A neighbor had offered to help install solar lighting along the path, a quiet gesture that needed no words. Others brought over small gifts, books, puzzles, home-cooked meals. One family, new to the block, introduced themselves with an apology they didn't need to give. They hadn't been there for what happened, but they had heard. Everyone had. The HOA was quiet too. The newsletters came less frequently. The language had changed, less formal, more human. The new board included a retired nurse and a veteran, both of whom had watched the story unfold and decided it was time to do more than shake their heads from behind curtains. Rules were still enforced, but there was now space for questions, for context. The neighborhood hadn't become perfect, but it had become aware. Karen's house sold after 2 months on the market. A young couple moved in, painted the door a soft green, and replaced the concrete lions with potted lavender. They waved from the porch. They said hello when they passed. They didn't ask what had happened in the months before, and no one rushed to tell them. The father still kept the folder labeled HOA in the filing cabinet, but it hadn't been touched in weeks. What had once felt like a weight pressing against his every move now sat quietly between other forgotten papers. He still checked the porch camera occasionally, but more out of habit than fear. The camera had never caught the most important moments anyway, the ones that lived in the space between arguments and headlines, in the small, quiet victories that followed. His son had started drawing again. Pictures of trucks mostly, big ones with flashing lights and lift gates and crates tied down with ropes. In his drawings, the truck always arrived. The equipment always got inside. The people were smiling. No one stood in the way. At school, he gave a short presentation about machines that help people breathe. His teacher emailed to say how clearly he spoke, how proudly. His parents read the message twice. They didn't cry, but the moment sat in their chests for the rest of the day like a warm stone, something to hold on to. The neighbors were different now, not in appearance, but in presence. They showed up to meetings. They asked better questions. One even proposed a new policy to create a rapid response protocol for any medical delivery in the neighborhood, an idea that passed without debate. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It meant that no one else would have to go through what this family had endured. Not on this street. Not again. In the evenings, the boy liked to sit on the porch steps with his mother, watching the streetlights flicker on. He would tell her how the machine worked in his own words, proud and certain, as if explaining something magical. She'd listen, smile, and nod. Sometimes his father would join them, leaning against the railing with a coffee he never finished, and when the sun set, when the air cooled and the porch lights glowed softly against the pavement, the house looked no different than any other. No signs, no banners, just one small family, sitting together, breathing in a world that had tried to stop them and failed.